This is Business Development Basics for Engineers. I am Stephanie Slocum, a structural engineer and founder of the career and leadership development company, Engineers Rising LLC. Today's presentation is part of a session originally presented as part of the Structural Engineering Institute's Structures Congress in 2019. It was authored by the Business Practices Committee, of which I am the current chair. If you'd like a copy of the slides shown in this presentation, please email our committee at the address shown on the screen. And now, let's get started. Sales and marketing can be a dirty word for many engineers. So first, why should engineers even bother with learning about sales, marketing, or business development? So let me ask you this question. Would you like to make more money? Pretty much all structural engineers will answer yes to that question. And when we follow that trail of money, we find that certain types of firms are more profitable than others. These high-performing firms make more than 10% on average than all other firms, according to Deltek's Architecture and Engineering Industry Survey. And one of the edges these firms have is that they are statistically much more likely to use a seller-doer business development model. So let's look a little closer at what a high-performing firm is. The data shows 450 companies, with the firm demographics you can see on the screen. Note that the vast majority of high-performing firms are small or medium-sized. Those high performers were 23% of the firms surveyed. So now that we know a little bit more about what a high-performing firm is, let's look at exactly what the seller-doer model is. So the seller-doer model is defined as a model where technical staff are also responsible for securing contracts or projects for their firm. The seller-doer model is very prevalent for engineering firms. 81% are using the seller-doer model exclusively or a hybrid. One of the reasons for this is that our architectural and contractor clients are using it, as well as some of the business owners are expecting it. And we can see that reflected in the percentage of clients, according to an SMPS report, that are using it too. As you can see, when firms were asked why they were using a seller-doer model, the primary reason cited was because the client expected it. Although this model is prevalent, it's really common to hear objections from engineers when it comes to learning business development skills. For example, things like these. I'm an engineer and my job has nothing to do with marketing or sales. But sales and marketing are better left to people with marketing and sales degrees. I'm not naturally good at networking. Or even if I wanted to, I just don't have time for sales or marketing or business development in addition to my project work. But let's get a reality check here. The key component of business development is building relationships. So if you have any interaction with clients, you are building a relationship. Engineers are typically building relationships every single day, whether they acknowledge it or not. As engineers, we aren't trained in the art of building relationships. So, since this comes unnaturally to us, we tend to resist business development, either outright or with excuses, since there is always more project work to be done. But isn't this the responsibility of firm owners? That's what many people think. But let's look at the typical position of a seller-doer. As you can see, they have many titles, but owners and project managers are the two most common. But notice there are even people who are seller-doers who we wouldn't normally expect to be one, like the estimator or the office manager. So if you are an engineer aspiring to even a moderate level position, this will be part of your job if it's not already. The question next becomes, what do seller-doers actually do? Well, they can be responsible for a number of things. As you can see on the screen, seller-doers are the blue lines, but notice the responsibilities reported by most of our seller-doers revolve around things like participating in client meetings and presentations, writing proposals, and participating in client organizations. Seller-Doers also author articles for client publications, attend networking events, and blog for their firm's website. Notice that all of these things revolve around one skill: communication, and specifically public speaking and networking. Now, we're going to talk about best practices. First, we'll cover best practices for firm leaders and managers to help your engineers be better seller-doers. Then, we'll talk about what individual engineers can do to learn these skills. What can firm leaders and managers do to help their engineers be better seller-doers? The four best practices are transparency, training, time, and recognition. Let's take these one by one. Have you ever felt like this? If so, you are not alone. Many new managers feel exactly the same. So the first best practice is transparency. First, what is transparency and why is it important? Many engineers know nothing about the business side of engineering when they start their career. I certainly didn't. Pulling back the curtain and showing the correlations between career success and an understanding of the importance of being able to nurture client relationships and bring in work down the road motivates smart, ambitious young professionals to want to learn more. It also gives them the time they need to learn the associated skills. Structural engineers are in the people-serving business, yet many don't look at it that way. Being transparent about the skills necessary and providing training on them early on keeps pipelines strong well before young professionals reach a level where they are required to bring in work. Next, let's talk training. Communication skills is where to focus, and specifically on practicing public speaking and presentations. Additionally, you'll want to make sure that engineers appreciate the role and the value of marketing, sales, and business development in your organization. Here are a few examples of ways employers can facilitate learning these skills. Mock interviews, low-risk internal presentations, shadowing marketing, sales, and/or senior staff, especially at pre-proposal events, collecting materials and proofreading proposals, or encouragement to attend networking events. Next up on the best practices list is time. What we found is that learning business development skills can be deeply uncomfortable and requires practice and effort to get good at. Project work will almost always be more comfortable to many engineers, and as we know, there's always more project work to be done. So what that means is that employers need to set clear expectations and provide resources needed to achieve business development goals or training. So what does that look like in practice? Here are some do's and don'ts for managing those expectations. Do set clear expectations for the time that should be spent in business development training. Don't expect business development training to be done in addition to project work or on the side. If you do, it won't get done. Do include real or mock public speaking and communications practice. Don't expect that engineers will be competent in these skills without explicit practice and feedback. Do set realistic behavior-based goals. Don't set unspecific results-based goals. Do provide numerous opportunities to practice networking skills and elevator pitches. Don't assume that engineers will be able to figure this out on their own without training. Finally, we have recognition. Engineers will model the behavior that they see being rewarded where they work. So if you want engineers to participate in business development, their efforts should be recognized well before they write their first proposal. Here's a few examples of expectations that could be set and measured that will give engineers confidence to continue learning and growing their business development skills. Attending networking events, writing a blog on a company website, giving a lunch and learn presentation, or attending a certain number of new or existing client visits in a month. Finally, you should talk about win rates. In Dell Tech's latest 2020 study, win rates hovered between 40 and 50%. Especially if it's your first time or first year working on business development and writing proposals, this can be really discouraging, as many engineers are accustomed to being right or continuing to work until they get it right. And it's opposite of every other type of training an engineer receives, where accuracy and not failing is of the utmost priority. Now, let's talk about what emerging leaders and young professionals can do to gain the skills they need, not to just be a better seller-doer, but to be promoted to an executive level position in the future. The four best practices are 1. Ask questions, 2. Get training, 3. Seek clarity, and 4. Be resourceful. Most professionals want to avoid what you're seeing on the screen right now. But it's exactly where many newly promoted managers find themselves. So if you are that manager, let's talk about what you can do to avoid this. First, ask questions. Here are 5 you can ask. How does your firm bring in work? Does the firm have business development people, seller-doers, or both? What are the responsibilities of each? What are the most important skills firm leaders need to keep the work coming in? And you're asking that question so you know what skills you should be working on. You can ask, is there anything I can do now to get ready to help with this process in the future? And what is the firm's elevator pitch for new clients? Is it the same or does it vary based on a particular client need? And once you learn that pitch, start practicing it. Next is getting training. Soft skills are immensely important in every area of your career. Here are a few examples of ways you can learn those skills before you need them and be able to apply them in the context of business development. It's also helpful to pay attention to how relationships in your office develop with clients. If, for example, it's common to invite the clients to go golfing, consider taking some lessons so that you are ready when your time comes. The third best practice is to seek clarity. The key questions to ask around this are, what are the expectations for engineers participating in business development? Here are some examples of questions you could ask. How many hours per week or per month are you expected to participate in business development activities? What are the firm's expectations for senior engineers or executives relative to bringing in work? How should this activity be prioritized relative to project work? What resources are available to help you learn this process? So, for example, will the company pay for Toastmasters or other soft skills training? Finally, best practice number 4 is to be resourceful. There are so many ways to learn these skills inside or outside of work. You can see a number of examples up on the screen. Ask questions of people who have a background in business. Learn how to read financial statements. Go to a trade show or sponsored event where you can volunteer to be at the booth so you can hear from the customers themselves about your product. You could volunteer, or you could start building your own following in a particular technical area. Thought leadership is expected to be one of the primary ways of marketing moving forward. Finally, let's talk about how to build client relationships. So first, people buy from people they trust. And every interaction with a client is an opportunity to either enhance or detract from your relationship. Knowing your role as to if you are an engineer or a trusted partner can be a key indicator of how well a business is doing. So a lot of times at different structural engineering events, I will hear structural engineers complain that structural engineering is becoming a commodity. And that is the difference between an engineer and a trusted partner. A trusted partner isn't a commodity because you've built the relationship where you are the go-to person for that particular client. You also want to make sure you listen to your client and not make assumptions about what your client wants. And that includes everything from being very, very clear on the scope of work to asking a client when the project is done what you did well and what you could have done better. Here, I also want to make sure we abide by the platinum rule. So we've all heard of the golden rule, but the platinum rule is where you do to others as they want you to do to them. This goes hand in hand with listening to your client. A lot of times we are tempted to make assumptions about what our clients want without asking them. So we want to make sure we ask and we build the relationship so it's beneficial from their perspective. Building relationships is a skill too, and you don't have to be a people person to get good at it. So here are several do's and don'ts for building those relationships. Do ask good questions. Typically, the so-called dumb questions, who, what, when, where, how, followed by tell me more, are a good way to go here. You don't want to ask leading questions. Similarly, you should listen with the intent to understand, as opposed to listening with the intent to be heard or while distracted, or just so you can add your own story and pitch. You want to really understand what your client needs, where their challenges are, and listen to what they say about those challenges and what they need. You do want to be your authentic professional self, while at the same time not oversharing. Additionally, especially when in person, be aware of your body language and tone. 93% of in-person communication is through things that are not spoken. So body language, how you say something. When you only focus on the verbal message being communicated, so for example, you're sitting there listening and you're trying to formulate what you're going to say next instead of paying attention, what happens is because you're thinking, your body language is at odds with what you're saying. That creates a red flag in the person's head who you're with, saying that you can't really be trusted because your body language and your verbal message are not congruent with one another. You also want to stay positive. Being negative, participating in gossip, or trash talking even just a little about other firms or people is a definite no-no. If a client hears you trash talking about other firms, their thought is going to be that, perhaps, what do you say about them when they're not in the room? Thanks for attending this presentation of Business Development Basics for Engineers. I'm Stephanie Slocum, your host, and if you would like a copy of these slides, please contact our committee at the email address shown on the screen.